Welcome back, everyone, to another ASMR video. And today we have something that came in the mail about a month and a half ago, at least, maybe a month ago. It is the God of War 20th Anniversary Retrospective, and this is the deluxe edition of that. I wanted to do this video a while ago, but a lot of things have happened. This has been a roller coaster of a 2025 for me. As you all know, or might not know, some of you do. I lost my border collie about a month ago, 2 months ago now maybe. At least 2 months ago, I think. And right after that, my golden retriever had surgery to remove tumors off of her body. So there was a good 2 weeks of the cone, and then after that I had to buy a doggy pajama set so she would stop eating her leg or licking her leg where the wound was. That wound and then the neck wound that she had from the surgeries had gotten infected. So it's been a battle with that. And then I had the flu for about a week. So I'm finally getting to this and have time to get to this. So let's take a look at exactly what comes in this retrospective here. Okay, so it says God of War 20th Anniversary Retrospective. War does not measure the strength of a man. From Kratos, God of War Ragnarok. A full-color hardcover 2-book set collecting detailed commentary on the past 20 years of the hit God of War games. The epic of Kratos was born in blood across the backdrops of Sparta, Olympus, and Hades. The myth grew, weaving between the 9 realms of the Aesir, Vanir, and Jotnar. Kratos' saga spans eons and pantheons, and now the creation of those stories can be explored in fastidious detail, from inspired conception and dedicated development to masterful performances and trend-setting design, all through exclusive and intimate interviews with the creative teams that have lent their passion and talent to the award-winning franchise. This deluxe edition package includes a 2-piece slipcase containing exclusive new cover designs for each book, deluxe gilded edges, ribbed spines, and ribbon bookmarks, 2 lithographs that depict moments from each era, collected in a bifold portfolio. God of War 20th Anniversary Retrospective is the perfect book set for fans of the iconic game series and lovers of action-adventure games and mythology. Uncover the people and stories behind one of gaming's most iconic and celebrated franchises. So let's open this up and see what's inside here. If I could get this, there we go. Okay, let's open this up. The interesting thing is I don't know where the lithographs are, because this is now empty. So we're going to go... Okay. Oh, I see. I see. Okay. I see what they did. Alright. First we'll go into the Greek saga. Okay. Let's move this out of the way. I think either way, can I zoom out? There we go. That's a lot better. Okay. God of War 20th Anniversary Retrospective Greek Saga, written by Rick Barba and the forward by Corey Barlog. Okay. Forward. The Greek era, where it all began. It really is strange to think of God of War as having eras now. Remembering all the way back to the Stone Age of 2003, when an only slightly less annoying and loudmouth version of me took a job just to pay the bills and ended up stumbling into the creative journey that would define my career. It was just Dark Odyssey, a game that seemed like it could be cool, but certainly would not be something that would last long enough to have actual eras. This is a testament both to the incredible team of people who have contributed so much of themselves over the years, as well as the astounding support from our wonderful fans every step of the way, from the Greek era to the Norse era and beyond. Reading through this book really made me realize what an absolutely wild ride this last 20 years has been. I can't imagine what the next 2 decades are going to bring. To be honest, I hope that I am a robot by then. I'm going to be super disappointed if that doesn't happen, says Corey Barlog. Introduction. A God's Eye View of a Flagship Franchise. On March 22, 2005, Sony's Santa Monica studio released God of War, a titanic clash of gods and monsters wrapped in an epic story. Set in the world of Greek mythology, the game featured an innovative combat system designed to unleash the player's inner beast. Its fluid, vicious gameplay has been described as elegant brutality. But equally compelling was the narrative hook, a gripping tale of betrayal and vengeance, infused with elements of classic Greek tragedy. The game made a superstar of its now iconic protagonist, Kratos of Sparta. It also collected most of the video game industry's 2005 Game of the Year awards. Inevitably, it seems now that original God of War spawned one of the most venerated video game franchises of all time. From 2005 to 2013, Kratos starred in 6 more God of War titles, set among the Greek pantheon of gods, each one highly acclaimed. Again, the series' recipe for success was equal parts audacious gameplay and ambitious storytelling. Gamers loved the furious, brutal combat system, inspired by the great Japanese fighting games of that era. On the other hand, GameDeveloper.com has called the God of War franchise a landmark in the history of game narrative. The storytelling still stands as an industry benchmark. For 9 raging years, Kratos laid waste to the competition while winning dozens of industry awards and setting PlayStation sales records. Then, after a half-decade hiatus, the series reemerged in 2018 with a bold reboot, transplanting its raging Greek antihero to the 9 realms of Norse mythology. So, 20 years, 10 titles, hundreds of accolades, including 2 consensus games of the year. All told, an estimated 70 million units sold in the series. As Kratos would say, I am what the gods have made me, i.e., the gaming gods at Santa Monica Studio. Now, to commemorate 2 decades of excellence, Sony and Santa Monica Studio proudly present this 2-volume God of War retrospective, celebrating a remarkable journey from humble roots to Olympian heights, flowing around archival photos and extraordinary samples of the concept art conjured for each game. Our God of War story spotlights the voices of the creative and production teams who made it all possible. We feature in-depth quotes from more than 60 interviews conducted with current and former Santa Monica Studio team members, each one a key contributor to the historic, award-winning success of the God of War franchise. This first volume focuses on the series' origin and the evolution of its magnificent Greek-era titles. Our second volume showcases the Norse-era masterpieces. But before diving in, you need to know this. The very first God of War game was nearly scuttled several times in the early phases of its product development. Creator David Jaffe recalls how his bug-filled builds would crash at Sony marketing meetings, suffering in comparison to more polished PS2 candidates from existing hit series like Insomniac's Ratchet & Clank or Naughty Dog's Jak and Dexter. I thought we were toast any number of times, laughs Jaffe. Fortunately for all of us, Sony saw enough in Jaffe's early vision to keep it nourished and let it grow. The result has been a near-perfect fusion of gameplay and story that just keeps getting better the more we play it. These pages ring with the voices of the people who made it possible. Part 1, the PS2 titles. God of War, March 22, 2005. In the beginning, Shannon Studstill, co-founder of Santa Monica Studio, who served as lead producer on God of War, has said basically God of War came straight from David Jaffe's imagination. Jaffe, a big fan of the 1981 cult classic film Clash of the Titans, had long envisioned an epic Titans-like game infused with adult themes and the darker, more underground sensibilities of Heavy Metal magazine. The old Greek myths are so rich in adventure, says Jaffe. The gods are nasty, they're cruel and unpredictable, and the monsters are epic. They offer ready-made game mechanics, Zeus and his thunderbolts, Medusa's gaze, the Minotaur, and the Cyclops. Jaffe remembers riding a bullet train across Japan, mulling the rudiments of the game as he reread Edith Hamilton's Mythology, Timeless Tales of Gods and Heroes, a book he says was like a Bible for him growing up. So I had a pen, and I was marking things like, oh yeah, that monster's cool, that's a game mechanic, that's a setting, that god's a boss. I was finding gameplay ideas on almost every page. As for perspective genre, Jaffe admitted the hack-and-slash combat system of Capcom's Onimusha series and the way it used thoughtful puzzle solving to balance its visceral violence. Set in feudal Japan, the Onimusha games also tapped into a supernatural world of demons and deities. And so Jaffe thought, let's do that with Greek gods, only better. Other gaming influences included Devil May Cry, Ico, the classic 2001 action-adventure game, and the great Sierra Online adventure games of the late 1970s and early 1980s. Upon hearing Jaffe's persuasive pitch, Sony bought in big, bestowing a generous budget and a remarkable level of creative control. Development began at the company's Santa Monica studio in 2002. Birth of an Angry Spartan. Jaffe and his team wanted an atypical protagonist, a troubled, even terrifying anti-hero, consumed by rage and obsessed with vengeance, one who had no reluctance to spill blood and dispense pain. Again, Jaffe referenced film, finding tonal inspiration in Mel Gibson's portrayal of Martin Riggs in Lethal Weapon and Russell Crowe's Maximus in Gladiator. With these as templates, Jaffe honed in on the protagonist's persona and worked with the lead concept artist, Charlie Wen, to craft the visual design of their angry agent of destruction. We didn't want some classical Greek hero with a plumed helmet and shiny armor, says Jaffe. We wanted a more savage look, an embodiment of rage, giving players license to unleash their dark side. With the anti-hero's name now officially set as Kratos, Wen tried a wide variety of takes, including some now amusing attempts to add humanizing touches. One version gave Kratos a toddler in a backpack, another gave him a puppy companion, but in the end, the solution was to strip away almost everything. Armor and costumes just got in the way of that brutal primal look Dave wanted, says Wen. Wearing a Spartan helm or mask also took away his individuality and looked kind of soulless. Jaffe agreed. Every time we erased another piece of equipment, we saw more of the raw, animalistic side of Kratos. All right, let's take a look at this in depth here. Inside look, getting the green light. We had several good concepts for our first big internal game after Kinetica, but decided on the one we were calling Dark Odyssey. Ken Feldman, lead environment artist, and his art team were very excited about the Greek mythology stuff, so I wrote up a 12-page proposal, and we put together an initial demo. It had some very basic combat in an almost non-textured, flat, shaded area, kind of like an old Atari Jaguar level of graphics. Well, Ken took one look at that demo and said, hey, let me design a room, something more representative of what the game could ultimately look like. So he did, and it was gorgeous. I mean, like in Wizard of Oz, when you get to Oz and everything turns from black and white to color. You stepped into this room and wow, you'd never seen anything look that good in real time before. Look, our core concept, the popularity of the genre, and our team's proven quality, all that was in our favor. But man, Ken's demo just wrapped it up and put a bow on it. Phil Harrison, Sony's executive VP of development, took a look and said, yeah, that's really good, keep going. It started with a $12 million budget, then it bumped up to $22 million, which was almost unheard of back then. Today, of course, $22 million is like, oh, that's cute. These days, the budgets are so massive that getting your project to greenlight is a multi-month process, with lots of people involved, and lots of hoops to jump through, and lots of compromises to make before you even get started. But back then, it was just, hey, I like this. This is a commercial game, and I like you guys. You're good. Keep going. And that was David Jaffe on God of War's approval process. Inside look, founding the studio. How to make fun games that sell. I met Alan Becker on my first day as a tester at Sony ImageSoft. Such a cool guy, seemed to have faith in me. We ended up working together as producer and designer on Twisted Metal games. Eventually, Alan and I had this crazy idea to create our dream studio, using Sony's vast resources while somehow staying independent in spirit. We were in Foster City then, and I lured Shannon Studstill out of a company in LA to join us. The three of us sort of loaded up the truck and headed south to Santa Monica. The plan was to have a flat hierarchy, Shannon as producer and me as creative lead, co-equal partners. If we disagreed on something, we'd take it to Alan, who'd make the final decision. I think that only happened one time. Shannon's producing skills are the best I've ever seen, and Alan is a visionary with the perfect temperament for overseeing creative people. Both are genuinely good people, too. That arrangement ended up as a great thesis statement for a studio. I have such great affection for that time and that amazing location, Penn Station. You know, we probably spent more money than we should have in building it out. I mean, we'd never founded a studio before, but I still dream about that space. Even our vision statement was great. Fun games that sell. Some people mocked it, But fuck them, right? Hey, it's a great North Star, you idiot. And that was David Jaffe, co-founder of Santa Monica Studio and director and lead designer of God of War. I'll always be thankful to Dave Jaffe for recruiting me to the big leagues. I started in 1997 at Sony's corporate mothership in Foster City, helping sort out Dave's team. Turns out I loved that team building part. That was the first version of our producer-director relationship, the one we took to Santa Monica Studio. Thank God for Alan Becker's desire to break out of corporate culture and built an independent studio in a first-party framework. What a vision. You know, Alan has such tremendous respect for the creative process. He was always unafraid to take risks and incubate creative projects. One of the key things was open communication. He really wanted a collaborative, open environment. No walls, no barriers between desks, that sort of thing. Yeah, the culture we all built together at Santa Monica, it just all goes back to Alan. We cut our teeth on our 2001 racing game, Kinetica, the first studio title. It didn't sell a lot of units, but it proved we could ship a game. It gave us a good engine to migrate. It helped us understand key aspects of team structure and technology needs, such as the importance of a solid technological foundation, the right tools, and the leadership required in environment, character, and concept art. Best of all, it provided our young, resilient, talented, and hungry team with valuable design and production experience. It laid the groundwork before we ventured into the unknown of building our first action-adventure game, God of War. And that was from Shannon Studstill, the co-founder of SMS and God of War producer. We co-founders spent the first 2 years just trying to figure out the shape of Santa Monica Studio. Dave Jaffe came up with our motto, and it was simple and perfect. Let's make fun games that sell. Ownership of each title would sit squarely with the game director and the producer, equal and opposing forces. Dave was the fierce creative guy, super sharp of mind and tongue. Shannon was the extremely well-centered studio mother who could oversee the operational side and counteract any craziness. My job was product strategy, portfolio planning, budget, schedule, all that general management corporate crap that nobody likes to do. A very balanced leadership team. Wait, actually there was an exception to that dual rule structure. The technology guys, Tim Moss and Christer Erickson, both reported directly to me. So they were their own thing. By the way, Tim and Dave had a fun relationship. Two guys who spoke entirely different languages, yet produced a game of the year. I admired both so much, but Shannon did a brilliant job as their translator. Anyway, the fundamental idea of Santa Monica Studio was to convert the creative forum into a shippable product. Fun games that sell. For me, one of the most important things ended up being that, in the end, we were a family, and the studio was a home. Over the years, people would move on, but then so often they'd come back and we'd welcome them with open arms. And that was Alan Becker, co-founder and first studio head of Santa Monica Studio. Now this is pretty cool right here. This is some early concept art of what the game is actually going to be called. Inside look, Naming Odysseys. The Greek project's original working title, Dark Odyssey, was an obvious homage to the Homeric saga. But Sony were worried that the illusion might be too literary and didn't quite capture the savage intensity David Jaffe envisioned. Several other title candidates passed through the concept stage, but by the time the studio officially unveiled the game in 2004, it had been renamed God of War and billed as a viscerally brutal odyssey through Greek mythology. The protagonist's original name, Dominus, didn't stick either. Sony marketing asked for the change for several reasons. An obvious one being that Dominus is not a Greek word but a Latin one, with multiple meanings in Roman law. So Jaffe asked his team to submit alternate names, and the more Hellenic-sounding Kratos was selected, an ancient Greek word that means strength or power. The concept guys. At first I think we were both sort of general concept artists, but Charlie was traditionally trained in figure drawing. His character sketches were just so exceptional, so unique and striking in that old Frank Frazetta, who was a famous fantasy sci-fi artist, heavy metal comic style. So it was natural for him to focus on characters while I focused on environments and the Greek architectural aesthetic. I'd been a world-building guy back at a previous job too, so it made sense. Man, I loved working at that place, Penn Station. It was like a big open art studio. Never worked anywhere like that before. That's one reason why I took the job, that space, because I had other offers too. Of course, Shannon, who hired me, was the other big reason. She's so great. Shannon had an art background herself, and she was a real advocate for artists. I knew it would be a special place to work, and it really was. Our team worked hard, but we had such a great time together. And that was Cecil Kim, an environment concept artist on God of War. A key component of Kratos' tragic backstory was informed by an early aesthetic choice by Wen. One day, Jaffe checked in on Wen's concept work and particularly admired the interpretation of Kratos with pale, ghostly skin. Wen explained that it was not a finished render, but Jaffe's reaction to Kratos' pallor motivated him to create a narrative explanation for the anti-hero's grim visage. Hence the origin of the Ghost of Sparta legend, with Kratos cursed to wear the bonded ashes of his slain wife and daughter. That unfinished piece triggered an important plot mechanism and became a symbolic manifestation of Kratos' rage and vengeance, says Jaffe. For his part, Wen admits he grew fond of the graphic quality and tonal feeling of Kratos' white skin offset by his blood-red tattoos. It gained that sort of iconic superhero quality, he says. Wen, of course, went on to a legendary career in the design of superhero imagery, working on some of the biggest superhero movies ever made, when he co-founded the visual development group at Marvel Studios. He led the department for years, defining the visual style of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But he traces his love for that role back to those God of War days, inventing Kratos. Here's some art. Inside, look, the Napkin God. Charlie Wen worked on Kratos' visual design for many months, trying to blend David Jaffe's desire for a brutal badass with Wen's own need for some connection to the character's story. Listening to the Gladiator soundtrack over and over for inspiration, Wen sketched many iterations of what he called our dark hero seeking some linkage. The last thing I wanted was something that looks cool but is devoid of meaning, an empty shell, says Wen. Sure, we wanted that rage, but we wanted Kratos somehow relatable too. Ideally, players would identify with his pain and root for him on his journey. As God of War's narrative development slowly unfolded in 2003, Wen says he began looking to comic book superheroes and WWE wrestling for characterization concepts. One day, he had a burst of inspiration that felt like a breakthrough. I just needed to go off on my own, armed with my brush pen, and try a few ideas, he says. So Wen went alone to lunch at a Carl's Jr. restaurant. When he arrived, he realized he forgot to bring paper to sketch on. Wanting to work fast, he grabbed some Carl's Jr.'s napkins. I had ideas flowing that couldn't wait, I guess, he says with a laugh. The result was the now famous God of War napkin sketches. Not only did Wen craft the essential look of the Kratos we know today, but he also added an iconic final touch, double blades chained to the Spartan's forearms. Again, David Jaffe's core idea was to unbridle the player's inner beast. Designing fluid, dynamic combat mechanisms would be central to that experience, of course. But for Kratos, it all starts with the furious action of the Blades of Chaos, forged in the foulest depths of Hades. Other weapons and magical moves merged in God of War over the years, but the blur of those twirling butcher blades became the signature gameplay element of the series' Greek era. Wrangling Kratos. David really knew what he wanted in terms of tone and structure, but the actual scriptwriting process evolved slowly over time. It started with conversations about specific ideas and scenes. He'd articulate what he wanted, and I'd try to turn that into script pages. There was a lot of emailing back and feedback back and forth, part by part. Some things David loved, some he didn't. It took a minute to nail down the tone he was looking for. A lot of wrangling on that. He could be very blunt. We're not going in that direction, Marianne. David knew exactly what he wanted once he heard it, so sometimes we just had to be patient and creep forward until we found it. And that was Marianne Krazizik on God of War's writing process. A story worth telling. As Charlie Wen and his artists proceeded with their visual design of Kratos, Jaffe and his narrative team worked to craft a compelling tale. The writers wanted players to identify with and care about the protagonist in ways not seen in most action-oriented games. From a story standpoint, Jaffe decided to give Kratos a simple, singular, and very personal objective: revenge. Driven by an unquenchable rage to avenge the deadly subterfuge that cost him his loved ones, the Spartan seeks to kill Ares, the Greek god of war and prime agent of his pain. But an oracle advises Kratos that a mortal cannot vanquish a god without access to a potent artifact, Pandora's box. Kratos' search for the box leads him across the desert of lost souls, takes him up the towering titan Kronos, and then casts him down into the fiery depths of the underworld. I wanted the plot driven by a quest for something very specific and legendary, says Jaffe, the same way the Ark of the Covenant anchors everything in Raiders of the Lost Ark. The search for Pandora's box would make the story's essence easy for players to reintegrate with even after stepping away from the game for a while. One other touch, Jaffe and his team devised the game's jarring in medias res opening scene, the hero's desperate suicidal plunge into the Aegean Sea from the highest peak in Greece. The plan: start with a bang at a climatic moment, then hop backward in time and play through the lead up to that moment, using flashbacks to deepen the core story. It was a clever narrative construct, says Studstill. We got a lot of critical praise for that story structure. Camera action. On the technical side, the design team opted to use the in-house game engine developed by Santa Monica Studio for its Kinetica racing game. Early on, Jaffe and lead programmer Tim Moss considered using a first-person camera perspective for God of War gameplay, but after experimenting, they felt it didn't deliver the melee combat experience they craved. First person just didn't have the same emotional impact in melee, says Moss. He and Jaffe wanted a more dramatic view of Kratos' attack moves, with wide-angle shots of chain blades slicing and dicing targets. So Moss and his team ultimately built a fixed third-person camera system that would become a hallmark of the God of War Greek era. It works as a shepherd in any traversal scene, guiding the player in the right direction, while lavishing attention on important details in the environmental design. But it also swivels to the most dramatic angles and action sequences, further enhancing the cinematic feel. Meanwhile, Jaffe's combat design team was busy. The plan was to craft God of War combat to allow for custom variations in playstyle, consistently producing new challenges and weapons and abilities across the entire runtime to keep things fresh. We wanted combat that was easy to learn, yet offered deep layers of mastery, says Richard Folk, combat system designer. The more you explore the combat system, the more it rewards you for trying out different moves and chaining combos in creative ways. Cory Barlog, the game's lead animator, put it this way: the idea was to give each player a full palette of moves and let them be the artist. God of War gameplay was also inspired by games like Ico and the Prince of Persia series, with their mix of contextual puzzles and platform traversal to balance out the combat action. I was determined to bring real thinking puzzles back to this genre, says Jaffe. Inside look: empowering those fickle artists. I think I was employee number 3 at Santa Monica Studio, and we had a very small engineering group on God of War, loosely divided into 2 teams. I ran gameplay and Krister Eriksson ran engine tools and tech. The studio was very tiny back then, lots of massive monitors in those ancient days before flat screens. Yeah, that's what I remember, lots of very young people with very big monitors. Our engineering goal was to write game systems that let artists and designers do the work themselves, right in the engine. Put the creative tools in the hands of the creatives. Generalized solutions that let them do their thing, but within careful constraints. That way we wouldn't have to special case too many things in the game. We really wanted to empower the artists because they were constantly changing their minds about their stuff. Populating a mythic world with the protagonist and the narrative in place and prototypes for gameplay emerging. Studio art teams began moving forward to conjure a game universe. As seen in these pages, the early concept sketches were striking and sophisticated, but the original bestiary lineup sketch was not quite that. Yet it's become something of a studio legend. David Jaffe's whiteboard sketch shown above was the first depiction of all monsters in the game. It's a conceptual image so famous internally that some members of the original God of War team keep copies for posterity and to amuse interviewers. When combat system designer and eventual director of God of War Ragnarok, Eric Williams, shared it with us, he pointed out that the satyrs don't even have arms. It helps us remember our humble-ass beginnings, he says, and also keeps things in perspective about the development process. Like, be patient and look for the potential in raw concepts. Environment artists began sketching out the locations called out in the script, various locales in Athens, the Desert of Lost Souls, the Temple of Pandora, the Underworld, and a peak at Mount Olympus. We wanted the environments to be very Greek and authentic, not just total fantasy versions, says art director Terry Smith. And we wanted epic, expansive spaces that mirrored the emotional impact Dave wanted. Lead environment designer and eventual director of God of War 3, Stig Amsmussen, adds that although the goal was to mirror the realism of classic adventure films, the team also wanted to leave in that realism with a comic book element. We wanted our world to look like a cinematic epic, he says. So we did our homework. We studied Greek architecture and the intricacies of those designs. But at the same time, we were forcing perspectives and doing crazy things with scale and lighting to make things feel more fantastical and larger than life. Meanwhile, the character art department began populating the emerging world with a bestiary of creatures: centaurs, satyrs, cyclopses, gorgons, harpies, skeletal troops, and the like, all based on Greek myths and Jaffe's crude early sketches. The roster included massive monsters like Kronos, the towering titan, who carries an entire temple built on his back. The team also conceived a Greek pantheon of gods and epic boss monsters like Medusa, the Hydra, and a massive undead minotaur called Pandora's Guardian. As I saw all of this roll in, I started getting pretty excited, laughs Jaffe. This was the game I'd wanted since I was a 10-year-old kid. Here it says, inside look, can you guys keep it down? When I joined SMS in 2001, it was a small, intimate, you knew everybody. It was like Cheers. Everybody knew your name. The space was so open you could see almost everybody. It was easy to make decisions because all your people were right next to you. If I needed something, Shannon's door was just a few feet away. Dave was close by. It was so much easier to be effective. I mention this because the development process for most AAA games or films these days is so large you get disconnected. And the key word at Santa Monica Studio was connection. It was easy to connect. It was built into the culture. It felt like a work family and it was cohesive. And that was from Charlie Wen, the lead concept artist and cinematic art director on God of War. When I first came aboard at SMS, I was inspired by the animation team, its processes and culture. They'd been at it for a while and I admired their system. It was so collaborative and streamlined. I wanted to bring that way of thinking to concept art. Concept art has to communicate a clear vision of an entire world to our audience, so we all needed to coordinate and work together. It isn't just these characters or those environments. It's more about an all-encompassing visual language. We needed to be one team, you know? Our concept art group ended up so close we'd have way too much fun just taking meetings. We'd laugh so much. Other people would be like, can you guys keep it down? My team all shared this love for deep diving into conceptual caves and fleshing out worlds and characters and stories. And so yeah, we had a great time together. Those guys are still very dear to my heart. Some more concept art here. The big picture. My job as an art director is get everybody to see the big picture in the same way. Once you all agree on that, you give creative people their space to be creative. Dave Jaffe set his story in classic Greek mythology, but we wanted to put our own heavy metal spin on it. So I suggested, hey, what if we give it a horror twist? Take all these Greek characters, all these creatures that everybody knows, Cyclops, Medusa, Minotaur, whatever, and make them horrifying, truly monstrous. Well, that got the concept art kicked off. It got the mood kicked off. In the end, of course, we backed off from the horror angle a bit. We backed away from too dark and moody and went for more colors, more cinematic warmth. But horror was a great way to get artists exploring ways to make things edgier and more adult in the way that David wanted. And that was from Terry Smith, the art director on God of War. Things you don't forget. One of my best God of War memories was midnight on the day the title released, March 22nd, 2005. About 40 of us from the dev team went into GameStop in Hollywood just to watch people line up for the first copies of the game. It was such a kick to see fans so excited about all our hard work, and enjoying that moment together with the people I worked with, that was a high point. Then there was the morning we were tweaking the last animations, and Mehdi Yesif, a lead animator, comes in with both hands in casts. He'd been in a car crash the night before and the airbag deployed, breaking both his thumbs. We were very relieved he was otherwise okay, but an animator with no thumbs is not what you need in crunch time. And that was from Tim Moss, the lead programmer on God of War. How to impress former colleagues. The way things ultimately turned out for this God of War franchise, well, people forget we were the underdog back then. We surprised everyone, including ourselves, until the end when I think we all realized our game was special, like really special. First few weeks, I had a lot of friends and colleagues from previous jobs calling me and raving about the game. They were all playing God of War at lunch, after work, watching each other play, obsessed with it. Even the music was giving everyone chills. And they were all like, how did you guys do this? Man, all I could say was I really admired David Jaffe for sticking to his vision. And that's Cecil Kim, the concept artist on God of War. Voice, music, and sound add the final layers of vibrancy and emotional heft to a video game world. For God of War, the studio put together a stellar crew of actors, composers, and sound designers. Their work earned rave reviews and won a sizable cabinet of awards for 2005, including several for Terrence C. Carson, whose resonant baritone gave unforgettable voice to Kratos. The original score also won industry recognition. Composed by Gerard K. Marino, Mike Reagan, Ron Fish, Winifred Phillips, and Chris Valesco. It was praised for its stirring orchestral tracks and creative use of ethnic instrumentation. CNET called it a standout, thrilling, and grandiose, surely the equal of any big screen movie soundtrack. Sony released the soundtrack album on March 1st, 2005. Dark Star, Bright Future. In the end, of course, Kratos took the world by storm, a charismatic new celebrity, slicing his way into gaming's pantheon of iconic characters. God of War earned a remarkable 12 nominations at the 9th Annual Interactive Achievement Awards, the video game industry equivalent of the Oscars, and won in 7 of those categories, including Overall Game of the Year, Outstanding Character Performance for a Male for T.C. Carson's portrayal of Kratos, and the Outstanding Achievement Awards in Animation, Sound Design, and Original Music Composition. David Jaffe was also named Designer of the Year at the 2005 Spike Video Game Awards. Before long, Kratos' menacing mane had become the face of the PlayStation 2 brand, a homegrown luminary for Sony. But the Spartan was more than just a mascot. He was a powerful new proxy for players. Gamers loved channeling his rage. It was cathartic. The ID unleashed. They wanted more. And we are going to stop here for this first video in the God of War Retrospective Extreme Sleep series. Thanks everyone for watching. Stay tuned for the next video where we will explore God of War 2 that came out in 2007. I appreciate all of you. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.